James Parker lived in a modest apartment at the edge of town, working nights as a cafeteria attendant at a small community college. He was a devoted single father to his 7-year-old daughter, Maya, and most evenings he juggled finishing his shift, picking up groceries for their sparse meals, and checking homework texts sent by Maya's teacher. On this particular night, the clock had just struck midnight when James slipped into his threadbare coat and grabbed a plastic bag containing 2 loaves of day-old bread, a carton of eggs, and a small container of milk. As he stepped into the dimly lit hallway, the hum of the vending machines and distant chatter of custodial staff echoed behind him. He dialed Maya's number to make sure she was asleep, but instead heard Rush breathing on the other end. His neighbor, Martha Millard, sobbing into the phone. "James," she whispered between tears, "Aaron's been in an accident. Please, you have to come." Aaron Miller was not a close friend of James or Maya. He was the teenage son of the neighbors who lived 2 doors down, a white family who had moved into the neighborhood only 6 months before. James had exchanged polite nods with Martha and her husband, Frank, in the cramped apartment complex lobby, and occasionally offered kind words to Aaron when he passed in the hallway. But in a place where money was scarce and trust was fragile, Aaron's world felt separate from James's small orbit. Still, James felt a tug in his chest at Martha's distress. He knew what it was to worry, and the idea of a teenager bleeding on a gurney ignited a protective instinct he could not ignore. He set the grocery bag on the floor with a soft thud and whispered a quick reassurance to Maya. He would be back soon. Then, with the practiced efficiency of someone who worked late hours for years, he locked his apartment door and jogged down the staircase to his aging sedan, its paint scratched and interior smelling faintly of coffee and vinyl. As he drove, the streetlights flickered on and off, casting uneven shadows on the cracked pavement. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the occasional barking dog or distant siren, reminders of how close danger and desperation often wandered. When James arrived at the hospital entrance, the automatic doors slid open with a hiss. He rushed inside, alerting the front desk staff that he was there on behalf of the Miller family. Nurses guided him down a stark corridor with bright fluorescent lights reflecting off polished linoleum floors. He spotted a gurney pushed into an examination room, where Aaron lay with a leg wrapped hastily in gauze and a tube taped to his arm. The teen's face was pale, eyes wide with confusion and pain. His skateboard lay by the corner of the stretcher, wheels still spinning slowly as though signaling the abruptness of the crash. From the moment James saw Aaron, a wave of empathy washed over him. He remembered his own struggles as a teenager, how one reckless move could upend everything. Taking a steadying breath, James approached the bedside quietly, feeling the weight of uncertainty settle in his shoulders. Despite their differences in age, race, and background in that sterile hospital room, he knew he would do whatever it took to help this boy who had barely been more than a passing acquaintance. James Parker moved through the hospital's sliding glass doors and into a cavernous, brightly lit lobby. The antiseptic scent of cleaning solution hung heavily in the air, mingling with the faint odor of rubber from sterilized equipment. Overhead, fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting a sterile glow on the pale linoleum floor. A wall-mounted clock ticked loudly, its second hand clicking in time with James's anxious heartbeat. He clutched the strap of his worn duffel bag, which contained a change of clothes for his daughter and a few dollars saved for unexpected emergencies. After last night's shift, money was scarce, but seeing a mother's tearful plea had overridden every other worry. He approached the nurse's station, where 2 attendants in light blue scrubs leaned on the counter, reviewing patient charts on clipboards. The soft hum of conversation between them ceased when James spoke, his voice low but urgent. "Mrs. Miller called me. She said Aaron is here. I'm here to sign for him." The taller nurse, her hair neatly tied back, glanced at a computer screen and then back at James. Her expression was reserved, but her tone held a hint of empathy. "I'll need to verify your information and ensure you understand what you're signing for. Once we confirm, we can admit him for treatment." James nodded and reached into his pocket for his wallet, pulling out his driver's license and a laminated copy of his daughter's school ID. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the weight of responsibility. The nurse took the documents and typed his name into the terminal. She looked up and said, "Aaron's condition is unstable. He has a fractured tibia and possible internal bruising. Surgery is likely. You need to be aware of the costs involved." She tapped a series of keys and a printed form slid across the counter. James read each line carefully, tracing his finger along the itemized list of potential charges: emergency room fees, x-rays, surgeon's fees, anesthesia, hospital stay, and post-operative care. His chest tightened as the total amount loomed in bold numbers at the bottom of the page. It was more than he earned in a month. Yet, as he watched the monitors in the next room beep softly, signaling Aaron's fragile condition, he knew there was no other choice. With a steady hand, he signed his name in the blank. The nurse collected the paperwork and gestured down the corridor. "He'll be prepped for surgery shortly. You can wait in the family lounge or stay by his bedside." James thanked her quietly, then stared at the form for a moment longer before folding it and tucking it into his coat. He felt a surge of resolve wash over him. Although the cost would strain his meager savings, the thought of leaving a terrified teenager without help felt impossible. He advanced toward the room where Aaron lay, his footsteps echoing in the hallway. A soft clang of bed wheels accompanied James as he entered the dimly lit examination area. Aaron's mother, Martha, sat nearby, fingers entwined, her knuckles white. She looked up, relief flooding her tear-streaked eyes when she spotted James. Although words escaped her, her gratitude was clear in her trembling smile. James offered a gentle nod, the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders. A nurse approached with a small needle, preparing to insert an IV line into Aaron's arm. James watched the teen's face contort with pain as the needle pierced his skin, but Aaron did not cry out. Instead, he squeezed his fists and closed his eyes, as if bracing for impact. James's heart ached at the sight, but he remained silent, understanding that his role in this moment was more than financial. It was a promise. He would stand beside this boy, cover what needed to be covered, and ensure that Aaron received the care necessary to pull through. James felt a knot tighten in his chest as he stepped into the hospital's waiting area. A narrow room with warm vinyl chairs arranged along the walls and a vending machine humming softly in the corner. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, casting a pale glow on the linoleum floor. The air smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, an aroma that James associated with long hours, worry, and the uncertainty that came with hospital stays. He settled into the nearest chair, placing his duffel bag at his feet, and ran a hand over his tired face. Somewhere behind the closed door, Aaron lay on a table, cold gel applied to his skin as technicians prepared him for x-rays. James listened to the distant clink of metal carts and hurried footsteps, reminders of the life-or-death matters unfolding in sterile rooms beyond his sight. A few feet away, Aaron's friends gathered in a small cluster, their sneakers scuffing against the floor as they shuffled nervously. They were a mixed group, some wearing hooded sweatshirts, others with graphic tees and sneakers too clean for the gritty neighborhood they called home. Their faces were pale, eyes wide with shock, and their voices quivered as they spoke in hushed tones. "Did you see the way he landed?" One whispered, glancing at the closed door. "It looked bad." Another peered through the narrow window built into the door, hoping for a glimpse of their friend on the x-ray table. Their conversation then shifted to Aaron's recent behavior. "He still hasn't paid me back for those concert tickets," one friend muttered, arms folded across his chest. "Thought he was too cool for us." Another chimed in, "And did you see him driving off in his dad's car last week? Doesn't even thank the man," his words laced with resentment. James overheard the murmurs but chose not to react. He understood the bitterness in their voices. Teenagers often failed to see the sacrifices made by the adults around them, blinded by their own sense of entitlement. Yet James felt a pang of sympathy for Aaron, recognizing that the boy was more than just a spoiled kid. He was a frightened teenager trapped in a situation that might change him forever. The mouse-like beeping of a heart monitor echoed faintly from the room where Aaron waited, its rhythm irregular yet persistent. Each beep punctuated James's thoughts, a reminder that time was slipping by and that every second mattered for a boy who had risked his life on a skateboard. James closed his eyes for a moment, replaying the day's events in his mind. The hurried traffic leaving work, Martha's tearful phone call, the anxious journey to the hospital. He felt fatigue tug at his eyelids but kept them open, determined to remain vigilant until he heard news of Aaron's condition. Moments passed and the friends shifted again. One of them checked his phone, scrolling through messages with trembling fingers, while another tugged nervously at his sleeve. James noticed how their bravado had melted into vulnerability, the bravado they once wore like armor slipping away under the weight of fear. Despite their earlier complaints, they now stood in silent solidarity, hoping for good news. James felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Worry had replaced gossip, and the shallow judgments had given way to genuine concern. As the automated voice over the hallway intercom announced an incoming staff member, James rose from his chair, footsteps soft against the floor. He walked toward the door of Aaron's room, steeling himself for whatever news awaited. Behind him, the group of friends exchanged a final glance before following at a respectful distance, their whispers fading into the quiet hum of the hospital corridor. In that moment, James understood that the journey ahead would challenge them all, teenagers and adults alike, in ways none of them could predict, bound together by a single fragile life on the other side of the door. After what felt like an eternity, the door swung open and a middle-aged surgeon stepped into the dimly lit waiting area. His scrubs were smeared with faint traces of blood, and he carried a clipboard that reflected the harsh glow of the overhead lights. A hush fell over the small group of onlookers as he cleared his throat and spoke in a calm, measured tone. Aaron has a displaced tibial fracture. We need to perform surgery as soon as possible to realign the bone, set metal plates, and ensure proper healing. He may also have soft tissue damage, which could require additional procedures or physical therapy afterward. James felt his stomach lurch. He had expected bad news, but not the full extent of it. The surgeon continued, "The costs are substantial. Between operating room fees, anesthesia, surgical implants, and at least 3 nights of hospital stay, we're looking at upwards of $5,000. That does not include postoperative care or any complications that may arise." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Martha's eyes widened, and she pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Across the corridor, Tasha, Aaron's closest friend, placed a comforting hand on Martha's shoulder. Aaron's father, Frank, paced back and forth, his face pale and drawn. No one spoke for a moment. James rose to his feet, fists clenched at his sides. He recalled the nights he had stayed awake agonizing over how to pay rent, how to afford groceries for Maya's lunchbox. He thought of the small jar hidden on a high shelf in his closet, stuffed with dollar bills saved from extra shifts and painstaking thrift store finds. It was money he never dared to spend except in emergencies. Now this felt like the kind of emergency that demanded every penny. Tasha glanced nervously at James and whispered, "Thank you for staying. You didn't have to." James shook his head, voice barely above a whisper. "I couldn't leave him here alone." He felt a surge of protectiveness for a boy who had fallen off a skateboard, who lay vulnerable under harsh fluorescent lights. The surgeon offered a sympathetic nod before stepping back. "We can begin prepping him once we have a guarantor on file." He paused and added quietly, "Time is critical to reduce swelling and prevent nerve damage." James took a deep breath and approached the nurse's station again. As he signed the financial responsibility form, he felt the weight of his signature press down on the thin paper. He thought of Maya's future, of her school supplies and birthdays to come. He wondered whether he would have to borrow money from a payday lender or ask his elderly aunt for a loan. But when he looked back at Aaron, pale and anxious on the gurney, the helplessness in the teen's eyes reminded him why he had agreed to stand in. With a steady hand, James signed the line. A soft electronic beep sounded as the nurse scanned his signature into the system. Aaron's surgeon nodded approvingly. "We'll begin prepping him for the operating room now. Mr. Parker, if you'd like to speak with me about any questions or concerns, come by my office after he's sedated." James gave a curt nod and returned to Aaron's side. He leaned down and placed a gentle hand on the teen's forehead. Aaron's eyes fluttered open, confusion in their depths. "Hey," James murmured. "I'm here. We're going to fix you up." Aaron managed a small, grateful nod before slipping into unconsciousness as anesthesia took hold. James sat back, exhaustion and resolve warring on his face. He glanced toward Martha, who offered him a tearful, thankful smile. The hum of medical equipment and distant footsteps filled the silence. As the operating room doors closed, James whispered to himself, "It's going to be okay." Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories. Hours had passed since the operating room doors closed behind Aaron, and the soft hum of hospital machines filled the air. The sterile scent of antiseptic lingered as the effects of anesthesia slowly wore off. Aaron's eyelids fluttered open, and for a moment he felt disoriented. His vision blurred, and a dull ache pulsed through his leg. He tried to move, but a sharp twinge stopped him. He realized he was lying on a narrow hospital bed, its thin white sheets tucked tightly around him. The room was dimly lit, and the only sound was the rhythmic beeping of a monitor tracking his vital signs. As clarity returned, Aaron's eyes focused on the figure seated beside him. James Parker sat in a metal chair, leaning forward with his elbows resting on his knees. His eyes were closed, and in his hands he held a worn drawing, the one Maya had sketched before he left that morning. The drawing portrayed a colorful sun with rays reaching out, and in the corner Maya had written her name in a heart. James's fingers traced the outline of the sun, his expression soft and reflective. When James felt a shift in Aaron's breathing, he opened his eyes and offered a gentle nod. Aaron sat up slowly, the pain in his leg reminding him of the weight of his situation. He glanced at the drawing on the bedside table, then back at James. A smirk formed on his lips, a mixture of confusion and the arrogance he wore like armor. "So you're the one paying for all of this?" he asked, his voice thick with the remnants of sleep and surprise. His words hung in the air, tinged with entitlement. James looked at him calmly, without judgment. He folded the drawing and placed it on his lap before responding. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he allowed Aaron to absorb the weight of his situation, to feel both the physical pain and the emotional vulnerability. When James finally spoke, his voice was steady. "I'm here because someone needs to be. Someone has to take care of you right now." Aaron shifted, his face contorting between recognition and indignation. He leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest, and his smirk deepened. "It's his job to foot the bill, right? He's a black man who should be grateful to help." His tone dripped with sarcasm, but also an unexamined belief that James was obligated. The implication cut deep, and a flicker of hurt flashed across James's eyes. Still, he remained composed. "Helping you isn't about obligation or color," James replied softly. "It's about doing the right thing when someone needs it." Aaron's friends, gathered quietly at the foot of the bed, exchanged uneasy glances. Tasha, who had been Aaron's closest companion since elementary school, shifted her weight from one foot to the other. She looked at Aaron with a mix of disappointment and concern. "You don't have to say things like that," she murmured, stepping forward. Aaron's face hardened. "I'm not apologizing for recognizing reality." His words were defensive, but beneath them lay confusion. He was starting to grasp that his assumptions about James were unfair. He studied James's calm expression and felt a twinge of guilt stir in his chest. James rose from the chair and walked to the small sink in the corner of the room. He washed his hands slowly, the water running clear. "I'll be back tomorrow morning," he said without hesitation. "Get some rest." Aaron nodded, closing his eyes as a fresh wave of pain washed over him. As James left the room, the door closing softly behind him, Aaron watched the drawing of the sun lying on the tray table. In that moment, the teen realized that kindness did not come with strings attached. He felt a shift within himself, a growing awareness that life sometimes demanded humility. Tasha moved to sit in James's empty chair, her eyes fixed on Aaron. "You know he did this because he cares." Aaron let out a slow breath, pain and gratitude mingling in his chest. "Yeah," he whispered. I know. James returned the next morning just as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds, casting soft lines across the pale walls. The antiseptic smell felt less sharp in the early light, but the hum of machines and distant footsteps still reminded him of the fragile reality Aaron faced. He carried a small paper bag containing a sandwich he had made at dawn. 2 slices of whole wheat bread with a thin layer of peanut butter and jelly, exactly what his daughter Maya preferred, but adapted for heartier hospital breakfasts. As James stepped into the room, he noticed Aaron sitting upright in bed, his leg propped on a pillow, and Tasha pacing near the window, her expression a mixture of hope and unease. Aaron glanced up when he heard the door click open and offered a curt nod. James placed the sandwich on the bedside table, then pulled up the metal chair beside the bed. He settled in, folding his hands on his lap, and watched the boy muster enough strength to greet him. Aaron's face reflected the dull ache that still pulsed through his leg and the weight of the previous day's confrontation. "Thank you for coming back," Aaron said quietly, avoiding James's gaze. He sounded more humble than the previous day, though the hurt from his words still lingered in the corners of his tone. "I know I was out of line." James offered a gentle smile, though his eyes betrayed the fatigue he felt from long hours at work and restless nights by the bedside. "No apology is necessary," he replied softly. "I'm here because you needed someone." Aaron's friends lingered near the doorway, shifting their weight from one foot to the other. Their earlier bravado seemed to have faded, replaced by quiet respect for the man who had stepped up when Aaron's parents were unavailable. Tasha, standing closest to the window, glanced at Aaron before looking back at James, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and concern. "I've been thinking a lot," Aaron continued, his voice unsteady. "I realize now that just because you signed those papers doesn't mean you had to. I thought it was your job, but it wasn't." He paused, wincing as a wave of pain traveled up his leg. James watched him carefully, ready to offer comfort if needed. "You're right," James replied, his tone calm. "I didn't have to, but sometimes doing the right thing means looking beyond what's expected. It means seeing someone as more than their situation, their color, or their background." Aaron nodded slowly, guilt mingling with gratitude across his features. He swallowed hard and continued. "I said something really hurtful yesterday. I assumed that because you're black and I'm white, you were somehow obligated to me. That was wrong." His voice cracked slightly, and James offered a reassuring nod. "Understanding begins with admitting mistakes," James said, folding the napkin from the sandwich bag and placing it on the table. "The important part is what you do next." Tasha stepped forward, her posture tense yet determined. "Aaron's changed a lot since this happened," she said, her voice soft. "He's going to be more careful, more aware of what people do for him." Aaron met Tasha's gaze, then turned back to James. "I want to make things right. I'll help around the apartment complex. I'll do errands, clean the hallways, whatever it takes." His offer echoed the sincerity in his expression. James leaned back, studying the teen's face through weary eyes. He saw the vulnerability beneath the bravado, and knew this moment could shape Aaron's future choices. After a moment's pause, James reached into his coat pocket and retrieved a small notebook, flipping it open to a blank page. He handed it to Aaron. "Write down 3 things you're grateful for each day," James suggested. "Gratitude can remind you that help often comes from unexpected places. It can keep you grounded." Aaron took the notebook with trembling fingers and nodded, understanding the gesture's deeper meaning. He watched James rise to leave, the chair scraping softly against the floor. Before stepping out, James placed a hand on Aaron's shoulder. "Heal well, Aaron," he said quietly. "And remember, kindness isn't about color or obligation. It's about seeing someone's need and acting on it." As the door closed, Aaron stared at the notebook in his hands, Tasha by his side, and felt a spark of determination ignite within him, a promise to honor the compassion that had saved him. In the days following Aaron's surgery, James Parker made it a point to visit the hospital every morning before heading to work. He arrived carrying a small tote bag filled with home-cooked meals, rice mixed with tender bits of chicken, lightly seasoned vegetables, and a thermos of warm soup. The soups reminded him of the ones his mother used to make when he was ill as a child. As soon as James stepped into the quiet hospital room, Aaron's eyes flickered open, and he offered a tired smile, the kind that still held traces of pain but also gratitude. James set the bag on the bedside table, carefully unpacking foil-wrapped containers. "Breakfast is served," he said quietly, settling into the metal chair beside Aaron's bed. He peeled back the foil, revealing perfectly cooked rice and chicken, then handed a plate to Aaron. Together they ate in silence for a few moments, the soft clink of utensils against plates filling the air. After Aaron finished eating, James gently helped him sit up and adjusted the pillow supporting his back. Then he pulled a bundle of textbooks and notebooks from his tote. "I brought your notebooks," James explained. "Your teachers said they'd email the assignments. Let's get you caught up." He opened a biology workbook and Aaron winced as he tried to turn a page with his unsteady hand. James noticed and reached over to steady the thin, worn paper. As James guided Aaron through a series of basic questions about cells and mitochondria, Aaron's limp shifted from raw pain to a quieter, more reflective shame. He realized that, despite the teen's earlier assumption that James was simply fulfilling a duty, his recovery depended entirely on James's compassion. At one point, Aaron's friend Tasha peeked through the half-open door, her brow furrowed with concern. "We're here," she whispered, placing a stack of clean clothes on a chair nearby. James nodded gratefully and continued to tutor Aaron, explaining each concept patiently, drawing diagrams in the margins of the notebook to help the teen visualize. Aaron found himself listening intently, not just to the lessons but to James's gentle demeanor, the kindness behind every word. Later that afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the blinds, James noticed that Aaron's water carafe was nearly empty. Aaron looked up with hesitation, then cleared his throat and whispered, "Could I have a glass of water?" The request felt monumental, because earlier the boy had barely acknowledged James's gestures. James smiled and poured cool water from a pitcher, holding the glass to Aaron's lips. "There you go," James said softly. As Aaron sipped, he reflected on how he had taken for granted the people who cared for him. Formerly blind to others' sacrifices, he now recognized how easily he could have fallen through the cracks. He felt a knot of remorse tighten as memories of his sarcastic remark, "It's his job, right?" flashed in his mind. James, sensing a change in Aaron's demeanor, gently asked, "How are you feeling today?" Aaron paused, then responded quietly, "I'm okay. Just grateful." The words felt awkward on his tongue, but sincere. James nodded, placing a hand on Aaron's shoulder to steady him. That evening, James caught Aaron dozing off, the textbook open on his lap, drooping toward the bed's edge. He reached out and closed the book, covering Aaron with a light blanket and brushing stray hairs from the teen's forehead. As James stood to leave, he paused at the doorway and looked back at Aaron's sleeping form. He whispered to himself, "He'll be all right." Outside the room, Tasha approached James and said, "Thank you for everything you're doing. He's better because of you." James offered a tired smile. "I'm doing what anyone would do," he replied quietly. But both knew it was more than obligation. It was compassion that had bridged gaps of age, race, and misunderstanding. As James walked down the hallway toward the elevators, he felt a sense of quiet pride. Aaron's recovery was no longer just a medical process. It was a journey of growth for both of them. And with each passing day, the bond between the unlikely pair strengthened, built on shared moments of care, humility, and newfound respect. On the morning of discharge, Aaron woke with a sense of anticipation he hadn't felt in weeks. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, and the soft hum of machines was quieter than usual. The scent of fresh coffee drifted from the nurse's station down the hall. He stretched carefully, aware of the stiff ache in his leg, then looked around the room. The whiteboard displayed today's date and a big discharge circled in red marker. James Parker arrived shortly after, carrying a small cardboard box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a simple gift, a hardcover notebook with a textured cover and a new pen, purchased from a thrift shop where James had found it for a few dollars. He pushed the door open and found Aaron sitting upright, his crutches leaning nearby. Aaron's eyes brightened as he spotted James. "Good morning," James said quietly, setting the box on the bedside table. "Ready to go home?" Aaron nodded, his voice soft but eager. "I am. Thank you for bringing this." He lifted the box and gently unwrapped it, revealing the notebook and pen. He traced his fingers over the cover, then looked up at James with gratitude shining in his eyes. James pulled up a metal chair and sat beside the bed. "You've done well. The doctor said you can start physical therapy next week, but for now, take it easy." Aaron closed the notebook, then placed it under his pillow. An unspoken promise to fill it with thoughts, gratitude, and plans for being a better neighbor and friend. Outside the door, Tasha and two other friends approached, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers they had picked from a patch near the hospital entrance. They entered quietly and handed the flowers to Aaron, their smiles genuine and warm. "We want you to remember how much you matter," Tasha said, her voice steady. "We're all proud of you." Aaron accepted the flowers, carefully placing them in a plastic cup filled with water on the windowsill. The vibrant colors looked almost miraculous against the sterile backdrop of hospital walls. He glanced at James, then at his friends, and felt a swell of emotion. Memories of angry words and judgment drifted through his mind, but now they felt distant, like a storm that had finally passed. As the nurse arrived with the paperwork for discharge, James quickly reviewed the instructions: follow-up appointments, medication schedule, wound care guidelines. He helped Aaron sign his name with his non-dominant hand and then folded the papers, placing them in a thin folder. With the final signature complete, the nurse smiled and announced that Aaron was free to go. James stood, collected the folded blankets, and offered his arm to Aaron. Together, they navigated the corridor, crutches in one hand and each other's support in the other. Tasha followed closely, carrying the small backpack filled with textbooks and Aaron's personal items. The hallway felt brighter than it had when they first arrived, the echoes of anxious footsteps replaced by soft chatter and distant laughter. On the steps outside the hospital, James and Aaron paused to take a deep breath of fresh air. The sky was clear, and a light breeze ruffled Aaron's hair. He looked at James and said, "I know I can't pay you back for everything, but I want you to know I'm going to change. I promise." James placed a firm hand on Aaron's shoulder and replied, "You've already begun." As they walked toward the parking lot, Aaron's friends gathered at the curb with Tasha's family van idling nearby. Martha Miller and Frank Miller stood at the edge, relief and gratitude evident on their faces. They waved as Aaron approached, and Martha called out, "Thank you, James, for everything. We owe you more than words can say." James nodded, a gentle smile crossing his face. "Just take care of him," he replied. The group loaded Aaron into the passenger seat of the van, tucking the wildflowers between the seat and the window. Aaron turned his head to watch James walk back to his old sedan. Their eyes met, and without words, they acknowledged the bond formed through adversity. When the van pulled away, Aaron pressed his forehead against the cool glass, gazing at James until he was out of sight. As James climbed into his car, he felt a sense of quiet fulfillment. He thought of Maya waiting for him at home, lunchbox packed and homework complete. For James, this morning marked more than a discharge. It was the start of new beginnings for both him and Aaron. A shared story of compassion that would echo long after the hospital walls had faded from memory.